She's not lying to you. She's doing something far more dangerous. She's operating on instinct, ancient, refined over thousands of years, a system so elegant, so invisible, that even she doesn't realize she's using it. And you think you're in control. You think you're making decisions. But every move you make has already been calculated. Not consciously, but calculated nonetheless. Machiavelli understood something most men spend their entire lives ignoring. Power doesn't announce itself. It hides. It adapts. It smiles while it maneuvers. And the most dangerous players are the ones who don't even know they're playing. This video is not for everyone. Most men will never see what you're about to see. They'll stumble through relationships blind, confused, blaming themselves or blaming her, never understanding the game. But you're different. You're here because you sense there's a pattern, a system, something operating beneath the surface that nobody talks about. You're right. What you're about to learn exists in the silence between words, in the decisions she makes without thinking, in the power dynamics that shape every interaction you've ever had. This is not about manipulation. This is about clarity, and clarity is the rarest form of power. If you recognize even 3 of these tactics in your life, drop the number 3 in the comments. No explanation, just the number. Let's see how many of you are actually paying attention.
Tactic 1. Emotional scarcity. Let's start with the most invisible weapon in her arsenal, emotional scarcity. She doesn't withhold affection because she's cruel. She does it because it works. Because when you're starving, even breadcrumbs feel like a feast. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived." She creates a vacuum, and you rush to fill it. One day she's warm, present, laughing at your jokes, looking at you like you're the only person in the room. The next, distant, cold, checking her phone, barely responding. You didn't do anything wrong. That's the point. The inconsistency isn't chaos, it's control. Because when you can't predict her emotional availability, you become desperate to earn it back. You start performing, chasing, overcompensating. And the more you chase, the more power she holds. High-value men recognize this immediately. They don't react, they mirror. When she pulls back, they pull back. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. Because the moment you stop chasing, one of 2 things happens. Either she returns to baseline, or she reveals she was never that invested to begin with. Either way, you win. Because you stop wasting energy on someone who's weaponizing their presence. Here's the warning. This tactic works because most men are terrified of loss. They'd rather cling to inconsistency than face the possibility of being alone. But you're not most men. You understand that emotional scarcity only has power if you're afraid to walk away.
Tactic 2. Strategic vulnerability. Now let's talk about something more dangerous. Strategic vulnerability. She tells you something painful, something personal, a story from her past, a wound she's carrying. And in that moment, you feel closer to her than ever before. You feel chosen, like she's let you into a place nobody else gets to see. And maybe she has. But here's what you need to understand. Vulnerability is not always an act of trust. Sometimes it's an act of strategy. Machiavelli knew this. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." When she shares something deeply personal, she's not just being open. She's creating a bond, a sense of obligation, a psychological contract that says, "I gave you access. Now you owe me loyalty." And it works. Because once you've seen her pain, you feel protective. You feel responsible. You start making excuses for her behavior. You tolerate things you wouldn't tolerate from anyone else, because to walk away now would feel like betrayal. This is how powerful people operate. They don't demand loyalty. They engineer it through selective vulnerability, through emotional investment, through making you feel like you're the only one who truly understands them. Look at how leaders do this. They share a struggle, a setback, a moment of doubt, and suddenly their followers are more committed than ever because now it's personal. She's doing the same thing, and she doesn't even realize it. So how do you apply this understanding? You recognize that vulnerability is a gift, but it's also a test. You honor it, you respect it, but you don't let it blind you to patterns of behavior that contradict her words. You watch what she does, not just what she shares. Because strategic vulnerability works on men who confuse emotional intimacy with compatibility. And you're too sharp to fall for that.
Tactic 3. Plausible deniability. Here's where it gets darker. Plausible deniability. She never says what she means. She implies, she suggests, she leaves just enough room for interpretation that if you call her out, she can claim you misunderstood. This is Machiavellian genius in its purest form. Machiavelli wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." She keeps her options open, always. She flirts with your friend, but if you mention it, she says she was just being friendly. She talks about her ex, but frames it as harmless nostalgia. She cancels plans, but always with a reason that sounds legitimate. You can't argue with her, because technically she hasn't done anything wrong. But you feel it, that gnawing sensation in your gut that something's off. That's plausible deniability at work. It's a protection mechanism. It allows her to test boundaries, explore options, and keep you uncertain without ever taking accountability. And the brilliance of it, you start doubting yourself. You start wondering if you're being paranoid, controlling, insecure. So you say nothing. You tolerate it because you don't want to be that guy. But here's what powerful men understand. Plausible deniability only works if you accept ambiguity. The moment you demand clarity, the game ends. You don't accuse, you don't attack. You simply say, "I need clear communication. If something's unclear, I'm going to assume it's not in alignment with what I want." And then you act accordingly. Because a woman who respects you will appreciate directness. A woman who doesn't will resent it. And that resentment, that's your answer. The warning here is simple. Men who accept plausible deniability train women to disrespect them. Because if you tolerate ambiguity, you're signaling that your boundaries are negotiable. They're not.
Tactic 4. Social proof manipulation. Let's talk about something most men completely miss. Social proof manipulation. She doesn't just want you, she wants you to see that other men want her. Not because she's vain, because it changes your behavior. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But in the context of attraction, it's better to be desired by many than committed to one, because desire from others increases your perceived value. She posts photos where she looks stunning. She mentions casually that someone hit on her. She talks about plans with male friends. She keeps her phone face down. None of this is accidental. She's creating an environment where you feel competition, where you feel like you need to prove yourself, where complacency feels dangerous. And it works, because men are biologically wired to compete. The moment you sense another man is interested, your effort increases, your attention sharpens, you start doing things you weren't doing before. This is how high-value women operate. They don't chase commitment. They create an ecosystem where commitment feels like winning a prize. Look at how brands do this. Limited availability, exclusive access, wait lists. They're not selling a product. They're selling scarcity and status. She's doing the same thing with her attention. So how do you navigate this? You recognize it for what it is, a test. She's seeing if you'll panic, if you'll become possessive, if you'll start chasing. The powerful move? You don't react. You maintain your own social proof. You have your own life, your own options, your own value that doesn't depend on her validation. Because the moment you start competing for her attention, you've already lost. The man who doesn't flinch in the face of competition is the man she respects. Here's the twist. This tactic reveals her insecurity. A truly secure woman doesn't need to constantly remind you that others want her. She knows her value. She doesn't need to perform it. So if you're seeing this behavior constantly, that's not confidence. That's fear. And fear is something you can work with, but only if you refuse to be manipulated by it.
Tactic 5. The frame shift. Now we're entering expert-level territory. The frame shift. This is when she subtly redefines reality in a way that benefits her, and you don't even notice it happening. One moment, you're having a calm conversation. The next, she's upset, and somehow you're the one apologizing. How did that happen? Machiavelli wrote, "Whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past." The frame shift is ancient. It's how power changes hands without violence, without confrontation. Just a subtle redefinition of who's wrong and who's right. She does this through emotional escalation, through shifting the focus from her behavior to your reaction, through rewriting history in real time. You brought up something that bothered you, but instead of addressing it, she makes it about how you brought it up, your tone, your timing, your aggression. Suddenly, the issue isn't what she did, it's what you did. And before you know it, you're defending yourself for something you didn't even do wrong. This is how political operatives work. They don't defend their position, they attack the premise of the question. They reframe the narrative so the opposition is always playing defense. She's doing the same thing, and most of the time, she doesn't even realize it. It's instinctive, learned behavior from every argument she's ever won. So how do you counter this? You hold the frame. You don't get pulled into emotional arguments. You stay calm, you restate your original point, and you refuse to be derailed. I hear what you're saying, but we're talking about X. Let's address X first. The woman who respects you will recalibrate. The woman who doesn't will escalate further. And that escalation, that's your signal. Because a person who can't have a calm conversation about issues is a person who will use emotion as a weapon for the rest of your relationship. The warning here, men who lose the frame repeatedly lose their relationships, not because the issues were unsolvable, but because they stopped being taken seriously. You're not here to win arguments. You're here to maintain respect. And respect starts with refusing to be gaslit into believing your concerns aren't valid.
Tactic 6. Calculated dependency. Let's go deeper. Calculated dependency. She makes herself indispensable, not through grand gestures, through small, consistent acts that weave her into your daily life. She starts leaving things at your place. She asks for your opinion on decisions. She introduces you to her friends. She talks about future plans in a way that assumes you'll be there. And slowly, without realizing it, you start building your life around her. Machiavelli said, men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, but of more serious ones they cannot. She's not crushing you. She's treating you so well, so consistently, that the idea of losing her becomes unbearable. This isn't manipulation in the malicious sense, it's strategy in the survival sense. Because she knows that the deeper you're invested, the less likely you are to leave, even when things get difficult, even when red flags appear, even when your gut tells you something's wrong. You've already built too much, invested too much, imagined too much of a future together, and walking away would mean dismantling all of that. This is how powerful people retain power. They don't demand loyalty, they make themselves irreplaceable. Through usefulness, through emotional support, through becoming the solution to problems you didn't know you had. Look at how corporations do this. Subscription models, ecosystem lock-in, loyalty programs. They're not just selling you a service, they're making it painful to leave. She's doing the same thing with her presence. So what's the counter move? You maintain independence. You keep your own routines, your own friends, your own goals that exist separately from her. Because the moment your happiness depends entirely on one person, you've given them total power over you. And total power corrupts, even good people. Here's the paradox. The more independent you remain, the healthier the relationship becomes. Because she's not with you out of dependency, she's with you out of choice. And choice is the only foundation that lasts. The warning. Men who lose their identity in relationships don't just lose the relationship, they lose themselves. You're not here to merge, you're here to complement. Remember that.
Tactic 7. The moral high ground. And now, the final tactic. The most sophisticated, the most dangerous. The moral high ground. She positions herself as the more evolved one, the more emotionally intelligent one, the one who's done the work. And you're the one who needs to grow, to change, to catch up. Machiavelli wrote, "Before all else, be armed." But the modern battlefield isn't physical, it's moral. She doesn't attack you directly. She questions your character, your maturity, your readiness for a real relationship. She says things like, "I just feel like you're not emotionally available," or "I need someone who can communicate better," or "I've been to therapy, maybe you should go too." And the brilliance of this? You can't argue. Because the moment you defend yourself, you prove her point. You're reactive, defensive, emotionally immature. So you start wondering, is she right? Am I the problem? And that's exactly where she wants you. Because once you accept that you're deficient, you'll do anything to prove you're worthy. You'll change, you'll adapt, you'll mold yourself into whatever she says she needs. This is how ideological movements work. They don't convince you through logic. They convince you through shame, by positioning themselves as morally superior and you as needing redemption. She's doing the same thing, not consciously, but effectively. So how do you handle this? You refuse to accept her frame without evidence. If she says you're emotionally unavailable, you ask for specific examples. If she says you don't communicate well, you ask what good communication looks like to her. You turn vague accusations into concrete conversations. Because the moral high ground only works if you accept the premise. The moment you demand specifics, the game changes. Either she provides legitimate feedback you can work with, or she reveals that she's using shame as a control mechanism. And if it's the latter, you walk. Because a partner who uses morality as a weapon isn't a partner. They're a manipulator. Here's the final warning. The moral high ground is the last resort of people who know they're losing. When logic fails, when evidence fails, they retreat to character assassination. And you're too valuable to waste time defending yourself against baseless accusations. You judge yourself by your actions, not by her narrative. So here we are, 7 tactics, 7 patterns, 7 invisible systems operating beneath every interaction you've ever had. And now, you see them. That's not a curse, it's a gift. Because once you understand the game, you stop being a piece on the board. You become a player. But here's what most men miss. Recognizing these tactics doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear. It allows you to separate instinct from intention, to honor the complexity of human behavior without being destroyed by it. She's not your enemy. She's responding to the same ancient programming you are, the same survival mechanisms, the same drive for security, validation, and power. The difference is you're now aware, and awareness is the only antidote to manipulation. Machiavelli spent his life studying power, not because he was evil, but because he understood that ignorance is the only true weakness. You can't navigate what you can't see, but you see it now. So, what do you do with this knowledge? You use it with precision, with restraint, with honor. You don't punish her for tactics she doesn't even know she's using. You simply refuse to be controlled by them. You maintain your frame, your independence, your self-respect, and you remember, the most powerful move is always the one you don't have to make. Because the man who doesn't need to react is the man who's already won. Stay sharp, stay sovereign, and never forget, the game only controls you if you don't know you're playing.